Welcome to Friday Night Games, everybody. I'm JComX. Tennis, tennis, tennis. Mario goddamn loves tennis. His name headlines at least 8 different tennis-themed video games spanning nearly every single Nintendo console. Except the Wii for some reason. Okay. Any Mario fan worth their weight in pasta can tell you that our favorite red-capped working-class hero made his tennis debut on the Nintendo 64, with the aptly named Mario Tennis. Wrong! Ah, my sweet summer child. No, Mario's premier tennis game goes all the way back to the arcades. Versus Tennis was Nintendo's first major tennis game, and as you can see here, Mario is prominently featured as the referee.
There you go, generalizing everything again. Just because Mario's in a game doesn't make it a Mario game. Mario has a skin in Minecraft now. Is Minecraft a Mario game?
You shut your french fry-filled mouth potato, this is my channel! Whether you feel that Verse Tennis, or simply Tennis as it's known on the Nintendo Entertainment System and Famicom, is a canonical Mario game or not, this game holds massive importance in Nintendo history. It may not seem like much today, but when Tennis was first released back in the early 80s, not only was it popular, but it was a revolution for tennis games. Tonight we're gonna get into all of that and more as we take a look at tennis's history, all of its different ports, and its lasting impact on Nintendo and the gaming world as a whole. Let's dive into the world of rackets, short shorts, and upper middle class white people with tennis. Video games owe a lot to tennis. Since the dawn of video games, variations of tennis have been simulated to uproarious applause. In fact, Tennis for Two, a primitive simulation of tennis using an oscilloscope for the screen, is considered to be the very first video game ever invented. 12 years later, the first home console, the Magnavox Odyssey, would continue the tradition by featuring table tennis as one of the 12 pack-in games. That same year, Atari ripped off Magnavox to create their own version for arcades, renaming it Pong, which was wildly successful and essentially revolutionized coin-op arcades, skyrocketing the popularity of video games to the stratosphere. Nintendo even owes a lot to tennis, as it entered the home video game era with its Pong clone, the Color TV Game 6. These lucrative little guys released in the late 70s in Japan, selling 1 million units and spawning an entire line of Color TV game consoles. They would become Nintendo's most successful venture since its Hanafuda playing cards. So it makes sense that in early 1984, one of the very first games Nintendo would release for its innovative new home console, the Famicom, was Tennis, a sports simulation that surpassed all prior attempts at the genre. We can't really talk about tennis without talking about its arcade counterpart, Versus Tennis. And the story of Versus Tennis is one and the same with the story of the Nintendo Versus system. The oft-untold saga of the Versus system began in 1983, following the American video game industry's monumental collapse, known as the video game crash of 1983. Due to a variety of issues, such as oversaturation of the gaming marketplace, ass-quality games, and general mismanagement, many video game companies and arcades went kaput. Even behemoths like Atari were struggling just to stay afloat. Donkey Kong's enormous popularity, along with a steady stream of follow-up titles, were the only reason Nintendo was able to weather this tumultuous period. Because of the disastrous collapse, those arcade manufacturers who were still able to stay afloat were eager to find ways to cheapen the cost of games. Nintendo's first attempt to slash its arcade game prices resulted in the Nintendo Pack system. Rather than buying a full new arcade game, Nintendo offered a cheaper alternative where arcades could convert their existing Nintendo cabinets out with a new game board and artwork. Nintendo would even send out a technician to replace everything for them. To boost the rollout of the Nintendo packs even further, Nintendo even offered a brand new Donkey Kong game sold exclusively as a Nintendo pack, Donkey Kong 3. Unfortunately, even with the price cut and a new game, Donkey Kong 3 only sold some 3,000 units, being completely overshadowed by a slew of new sports games like Track and Field, which dominated arcades. Meanwhile, since late 1981, shortly after Donkey Kong began causing waves in arcades, Nintendo had been developing the Famicom, a cutting-edge home console tailor-made to play interchangeable cartridges based on Nintendo's arcade games. 2 years later, in 1983, Nintendo released the Famicom in Japan, the same year as America's video game crash. While the Famicom's hardware was not as powerful or impressive as a dedicated arcade cabinet, Nintendo could produce games for it much faster. Capitalizing on it further, Nintendo revamped its Nintendo Pack idea into the Nintendo Versus system, which would bring those same Famicom games into arcades. Essentially, the Versus system was a Famicom charading as an arcade, the main gimmick being its multiplayer. It came in two different forms, either a standard upright version with two cabinets side by side, or a smaller compact version nicknamed the Red Tent. Just like with the Famicom, swapping out games for the Versus system was advertised to be so easy, an arcade owner could do it right on the spot, even without the aid of a technician. These changes allowed Nintendo to pitch the Versus system as a low-cost, low-risk investment that would provide a steady stream of interchangeable quality games to arcade owners. Despite the benefits, the devastation of the video game crash was still fresh on everyone's mind, and many buyers required more assurance. To that end, Nintendo offered an unprecedented and extremely lucrative deal, where buyers could test run the Versus system for 90 days. If they weren't satisfied, they could send the system back and Nintendo would eat the cost completely, or they could pay the balance and keep the system. Nintendo essentially took on all the risk. It was a huge gamble, but it massively paid off for Nintendo, as by 1986 they had sold an estimated 100,000 units, and they were able to prove that America was still interested in the games they were making. The only question was, what games would Nintendo use to promote their new and innovative Versus system? As previously mentioned, during this time sports games were surging in popularity. Games like Track and Field, Championship Baseball, and even Nintendo's own Punch-Out were gobbling up quarters faster than Pac-Man. So naturally, Nintendo wanted a fun and engaging sports game of their own that could go toe-to-toe with their competitors. After having proven himself as a game design juggernaut with the likes of Donkey Kong, Popeye, and Mario Bros., Nintendo's golden boy, Shigeru Miyamoto, was the obvious choice to helm their new game. In fact, Miyamoto was tasked to develop multiple sports titles for Nintendo simultaneously. In addition to tennis, he was also developing baseball and golf, all of which were released both for the Famicom and the Versus system. Miyamoto brought his now iconic design philosophy to all of the games: bright colors, large, easily recognizable characters, and simple, intuitive gameplay. When it comes to tennis specifically, the gameplay follows prior games like Real Sports Tennis on the Atari 2600 and Championship Tennis for the SG-1000. The player views the game from behind and slightly above the characters, rather than the more archaic side view, but it also refines the movements and overall experience to set it apart from its contemporaries. In Japan, tennis was released for both the Versus system as well as the Famicom right at the top of the year in 1984, while in the US, it was released a few months later alongside the American launch of the Versus system itself. Alright, so let's dive into this tennis shit already. We're gonna start off with the Famicom/NES version this time. Normally this is where I'd take a look at the manual and explain the game, but what, I'm gonna sit here and explain fucking tennis to you like a douche? You know tennis, and even if you don't, come on, it was literally the first game ever invented. You fucking know this shit. Really, the only things to note from the manual are that you have two modes, singles and doubles. In singles, you play one-on-one against a computer, and in doubles, you team up with a second player and both of you face off against two virtual opponents. After choosing your mode, then you can also choose your opponent's skill level, which ranges from 1 to 5, with 5 being the most difficult. As usual, you use the D-pad to control your character's movement, while the A button is used for swinging and serving the ball. The B button is used to lob the ball, which just means that it goes high and slow.
シングルス、ダブルスの本格テニスをコンピュータと技比べ。
Incredible. How long has he been practicing?
1 billion.
Incredible! Impossible!
Ever since he was a child and his parents died in a tragic tennis accident, he vowed revenge. Say what you will about the boy. He's not bright. Nobody likes him. He can't swing a racket worth shit. But he's got heart. He may just become a purple shirt yet. I'm not good enough. I can't do it, coach. What's that? I guess you just don't care about your parents, huh? I guess they just died in vain then. Are you gonna get back up and try or what?
You know what, Coach? You're right. I will practice every day for my parents.
Look who decided to pick up the racket. Now what in Sam Hill is going on? Brother?
Alright, let me show you how a real gamer does it, baby. Ha! There we go, baby! Wait, fault? Okay, fine, I'll try again. Ha! Ah, shit. That's okay, mulligan! Here we go. Fault! One more time. Double fault! Jesus, it shouldn't be so freaking hard. God damn it! Why am I so bad at this? I'm just trying to serve it for f***'s sake. No! Why? Holy shit, I couldn't serve the ball a single goddamn time! Whatever, eventually I started getting the timing down. Your character tosses the ball up automatically and you just have to get the timing right. Usually you want to hit the ball right around the middle of its arc so the ball doesn't go flying out of bounds. But once you get the hang of it, you can experiment with positioning your ball and strategizing more. Once I familiarized myself with the controls and flow of the game, I started having a lot of fun. I'm especially impressed with the physics and perspective of the ball. It seems like that would be the most difficult yet most important thing to get balanced in a game like this. Alright, let's just get this out of the way. What the f*** is this shit? I'm positive I'm not the first one to point out how absolutely jacked up the point tallying system in tennis is, but this is just inexplicable. I'm just gonna blame the British and move on. No, I'm not looking up who invented tennis, we're moving on! So if you don't know, in tennis, 0 points is love, 1 point is 15, 2 is 30, 3 is 40, and 4 is game. What is the logic behind this? Like, at first it seems like each point is worth 15, but then no, it goes from 30 to 40. Not only that, but if both players are tied at 40, it's called a deuce. And what does it take to win tennis? Well, a tennis match consists of 3 sets, which are essentially you'll need to win 6 players to tie on the final set. Use a tiebreaker to win the 3 sets. You win an entire match. You can't just keep making up the rules whatever you want! These rules have no rhyme or reason. I'm about ready to drop a fucking deuce all over this bullshit. Eventually, someone will win the round, and with enough tenacity, the entire match. After winning a match, you'll then be faced off against a slightly more difficult opponent. Level 1 is green, level 2 pink, level 3 white, level 4 purple, and level 5 black. Not only do these opponents get better at the game, but the speed of the game itself also increases with each difficulty. After playing against some of the higher difficulty characters for a while, it is fun to go back to some of the earlier ones, because it feels like you're playing in slow motion. These tougher opponents don't f*** around either. I was barely able to score a single point against them, let alone a set or a match. Every time I serve, he runs up to the net like, "Don't you f***ing dare!" Ref, can I get a timeout? This guy's aura is mad threatening. And sure, they may act tough, but then when you hit a lob, they do a little shimmy shuffle with their feet, like... You also might notice that because of the primitive capabilities of the Famicom hardware, certain graphics are part of the background that you wouldn't expect. The ball will occasionally bounce on the top of the scoreboard, or the CPU will walk right on the top of Mario's speech bubble. Alright, come on, there's gotta be a penalty for that. And I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't point out how adorable Mario is as he's reffing up there. Look at his little tiny eyes as he watches the ball. No wonder this little guy became an icon worldwide. How could you not love him? The black and white color scheme they gave him also looks really good. It almost makes me forget how much of an asshole he is whenever he's calling the game, specifically against me. Come on, you call that an out? How much are they paying you for these bogus calls? Get the meatballs out of your eyes. God! So that's a look at singles, but how about the doubles? After all, multiplayer is a big selling point for these early Famicom games. Honestly, the multiplayer mode makes the single player look like garbage. I played with my wife, Lexington, and teaming up with her made the game exponentially more fun. Sharing our victories and losses, shit-talking the computers, and slowly getting better as time goes on made the experience so much more enjoyable. Everything that is fun about the single player is still here. the engaging gameplay, the tight controls, but with a teammate there's less pressure to be absolutely perfect, and when you get an especially good volley going, it's hype as hell! Doubles is definitely the superior mode, and if you're looking to play a little NES tennis, then I would highly recommend grabbing a friend to come join with you. So how does the arcade versus tennis version compare? Right from the get-go, you can tell this game is extremely similar to the Famicom version. I thought Mario Bros had an accurate conversion, but this is nearly identical. Of course, the Versus system had the advantage of essentially sharing the Famicom's hardware, but even so, I wasn't expecting it to be this close. Really, the only major differences here are visual. The scoreboard and characters have more detail, and the colors are more vibrant. The court is orange instead of brown, and the ball is more of a tennis ball green. The angle of the court is also slightly different, but you probably wouldn't even notice unless you were playing the games back to back. I also think it's rad that you get to play as a lady in this version, but they just couldn't help but flash her underwear every time she hits the ball. I know that's like a thing in tennis, but it's almost comical how much they go out of their way to include it in every one of her animations. Like, come on. Another thing that Versus Tennis had over the Famicom version was that you could hook up two Versus systems together and have 4 players facing off in a 2v2 doubles match. We're talking 4-player in the early 80s. The Nintendo Switch actually brings this 4-player option back for the very first time ever with Arcade Archives Versus Tennis. The only problem is each player needs to have their own Nintendo Switch console and a copy of Versus Tennis. The game already costs $8. Ain't no way the 4-player doubles match is worth $32. What do you think we're just made of money?
You'll never defeat me, little brother, and you'll never avenge our parents!
You're wrong! I believe in hope. I believe what our parents taught us.
What did hope ever do for our parents?
It gave them strength.
Strength? They never got strength from hope. They got it from the secret technique.
What?
They never taught you? I guess you weren't the favorite after all.
Maybe Left Hand Stroke Joey was right, and I should just give up.
I'll teach you about red shirts.
And surprise, surprise, we're not done yet. We have one final version of tennis we need to talk about. You see, even though Nintendo was experiencing breakthrough success with the Famicom back in 1984, they were still hungry for more. And that Japanese home computer market was looking mighty fine right about now. That's right, 1980s PC gamers, we've got Nintendo games headed your way faster than Mario can save Mom. Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball. To help deliver these games to its new audience, Nintendo teamed up with software developer Hudson Soft. After the success of Hudson's first Famicom port, Lode Runner, Nintendo granted them license to develop remixed versions of Mario Bros. And Donkey Kong 3. These ports were made exclusively for Japanese home computers, like the popular NEC PC 8800 or the Sharp X1. By 1985, sales were strong enough that Nintendo even expanded Hudson's license to port over even more of our favorite Famicom games, like Excite Bike, Ice Climber, and of course, Tennis. It's a shame the PC versions of these games never left Japan. It's a really cool bit of Nintendo history that's way too often overlooked. Not only was this a time when Nintendo would allow its precious intellectual properties to be released on competing platforms, it was also probably how many PC owners in Japan were introduced to these games. I'll be playing the Sharp X1 version of the game rather than the NEC PC 8001 version, mostly because Sharp had a strong working relationship with Nintendo at the time and helped create the Game & Watch. It also seems like it has the slightly better version of the game, but they're probably mostly the same, honestly. So, how does this version hold up? Surprisingly, really well! As you can tell, there's a pretty distinct visual difference. This time the court color is vibrant red, and both tennis players now share the same coloring. The opponents also don't change their color along with their difficulty, and the Nintendo logo is missing from the back of the court. The way the CPU renders scanlines also stands out quite a lot compared to the arcade and NES versions, and the court has a crosshatch texture. Visually, it's the most distinct from the other versions, and it's probably my favorite thing about this version. I am absolutely here for the retro PC vibes. Visuals aside, the gameplay is very similar, if not a bit easier than the other versions, at least on the lower levels. The controls work really well though. I personally tend to prefer a controller to a keyboard, but I didn't have any issues playing this game. Other than those minor differences, the game retains all of the features of the other versions and is a very faithful port. This is definitely a worthwhile version, and for a Japanese PC owner in the mid-80s, it would have been a solid way to experience the game. Versus Tennis was extremely popular upon its arrival to the US. Apparently, it was so successful that some arcade operators were worried about replacing it with Nintendo's next Versus System game, Versus Baseball. Versus Tennis went on to become one of the best-selling Versus System games and one of the top-performing arcade games in all of 1984, while in Japan it topped Game Machine magazine's arcade charts for both March and April. The Versus System itself stuck around for years to come, and that was in no small part due to Versus Tennis as its foremost game. The Versus System then introduced arcade-goers to classic games like Excite Bike, Ice Climbers, and Duck Hunt, and helped pave the way for the Famicom's introduction to the US a year later. And of course, when the Famicom did launch in the US under its new name, the Nintendo Entertainment System, Tennis was one of the launch titles available on day one. Between the Famicom and NES, it would go on to sell over 2 million copies. However, not everyone thought that the Versus System was an upgrade. Jerry Momoda, a Nintendo of America employee at the time, thought that the Versus System was a big step back for Nintendo. Comparing Punch-Out to the Versus System makes the dip in quality very apparent. Punch-Out has large, detailed characters using a wide range of colors and a control scheme specifically designed around the game. Comparatively, Versus Tennis, while still colorful and charming, admittedly has much less detail and a more limited color palette and control scheme. This does little to diminish the fun of the game, but the trade-off is still there nonetheless. And regardless, the Versus System was a moneymaker, and Tennis led the charge. Nearly 2 decades later, Mario, discontent to sit on the sidelines any longer, would pick up the racket himself in Mario Tennis on the N64.
Hey, whoa, hold on there, buddy. This is JComX live from the editing bay, uncensored, unscripted, to tell you that, I lied to you. So as I was gathering footage for this episode, I realized that Mario Tennis for the N64 is actually not the first Mario Tennis game. That honor actually goes to Mario's Tennis on the Virtual Boy of all things. Gunpei Yokoi coming in clutch once again. The first time Mario ever picked up a tennis racket was on the Virtual Boy of all things, 5 years before Mario Tennis on the N64. So I just had to clear up the record. Don't get in the comments about it, or do. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but let it be shown that I'm correcting myself. And back to your regularly scheduled programming.
And since then, Mario has been the series' mascot, with new entries to the franchise releasing in every new console generation. Even outside of the Mario Tennis franchise, Nintendo frequently includes tennis in sports compilations like Wii Sports and Clubhouse Games. So what do I personally think of tennis? I mean, it's alright. I know, I just went on and on about this game and how important it is for Nintendo, but honestly, tennis's importance in history is much more interesting to me than the game itself. It's not to say that it's a bad game by any means. It's actually a really good time if you like retro sports games like this. I very much enjoyed sitting back, sipping on some beers, and settling into some 8-bit nostalgia, but unless you're looking for that very specific kind of vibe, there's just not much to come back to. Back in the early 80s, after playing a few rounds of Donkey Kong or Mario Bros, it would have been awesome to switch over to tennis or baseball, which have a totally different kind of appeal, so I definitely think it rounded out the Famicom's early library perfectly. But if it's specifically tennis that you're after, there are just so many better options by now. You've got more realistic tennis games like Top Spin, motion-based games like Wii Sports, and a mix of both with Mario Tennis Aces. But what about you? Did you grow up playing tennis? Are you like me with a mild appreciation for the game? Or do you fucking hate me and tennis and all of fucking Nintendo? You know what? Whatever you have to say, let me know in the comments. I'm excited to see what you guys think. Well, didn't think such an unassuming game like tennis would be such an important piece of Nintendo history, did ya? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet, because next time on Friday Night Games, we've got another pivotal moment in Nintendo's history, this time for a different reason. We'll be looking at pinball and the legendary man behind its creation. Who could it be? Well, you'll just have to subscribe and tune in next time to find out, right here on Friday Night Games. It's time for this week's subscriber shoutout. This week's shoutouts go to Jay Does Stuff, Colton Cook, Viking, and Ugnius. Ugnius? I actually don't know how to pronounce that. Thank you for your awesome comments and joining me on my Nintendo journey. You guys rock.